What's up, night owls? Welcome back to Demon Sleep. Real quick, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I personally read every single one of them, and honestly, it makes my day seeing you all from around the world. If these dark tailies help you drift off or just escape reality for a bit, smash that like button and subscribe. But only if you think we've earned it. No pressure. Alright, lights off, rain on, blankets up. Let's dive into tonight's nightmare fuel. The Rake documented ENCUNTRS before it had a name. The photograph recovered from a Connecticut marina in November 2003 shows the interior of a cabin aboard the research vessel Ambience. The bed is made. The lamp is still on. At the foot of the mattress, pressed into the fabric, are two indentations, each approximately 7 inches long, 3 inches wide, spaced 14 inches apart. Something had been kneeling there for a very long time. The captain was never found. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back. There is a particular arrogance native to the human species, a presumption, comfortable in its smallness, that the universe arranged itself in concentric rings of comprehensibility, placing mankind at the center, and that whatever exists in the dark exists there because it is lesser, that the shadows accommodate us, that the things which move beyond the margins of firelight do so because they fear what we have built. This presumption is ancient. It is also categorically false. What we have chosen to call the Rake, and the inadequacy of that name will become apparent in a manner that language itself struggles to accommodate, does not exist at the margins of human civilization as a consequence of our progress. It does not retreat before our lights. It does not fear our constructions. The evidence, when assembled with the rigor it demands, suggests something far more disturbing. It was here before the first human hand pressed charcoal against limestone. It observed the first fires. It watched, as it watches now, as it has always watched, with an attention that suggests neither appetite nor malice, but something older and more indifferent than either. The earliest physical record we can confidently attribute to this entity was discovered in the Lascaux cave system of southwestern France, in a passage not open to the public, not included in any standard archaeological documentation, until Dr. Ilya Kravitz of the University of Prague submitted his suppressed 1978 monograph to a private academic archive. The chamber in question, approximately 40 meters beyond the main hall of the Bulls, accessible through a passage so narrow that excavation required the removal of a load-bearing limestone shelf, contained paintings carbon dated to approximately 17,000 BCE. Among the more conventional representations of aurochs and elk, executed with the remarkable sophistication we have come to expect from Paleolithic artists, there is a figure rendered apart from the others. It stands upright. Its proportions are wrong in ways the artist clearly struggled to articulate. The limbs too long, the neck at an angle the human neck does not achieve, the digits of both hands extended to a length that defies anatomy. It is not hunting. It is not fleeing. It is positioned in relation to 3 smaller figures, clearly human, in the unambiguous posture of something that is watching them sleep. The 3 human figures in the painting are oriented towards something else entirely. They have not noticed. They do not know they are being watched. They never do in any of the records. Across 17,000 years of encounter, verified and documented with the painful specificity that the subject demands, not one account contains a moment in which the witness became the witness first. It is always found watching. It is never surprised. It is never caught. The word ambush implies aggression. The word observation implies a subject that will eventually leave. Neither word is adequate. Dr. Nadia Vazik, cryptoanthropologist, University of Vienna, 2019. What separates this entity from standard folklore constructions is the chronological consistency. Monsters change. They adapt to the cultural anxieties of the period producing them. What we track across these records does not change. The proportions, the posture, the behavior, identical across civilizations that had no contact with one another. That's not mythology. That's documentation. What the Lascaux figure represents is not the beginning of the rake's existence. It represents merely the beginning of our ability to record it. Whatever preceded that cave, whatever moved through the forests of the Pleistocene, whatever crouched in the dark outside the fire circles of the first modern humans, predates our capacity to describe it by an unknown margin. The cave painting is not an origin, it is a middle. Something had already been watching for long enough that the artist felt compelled to document it. Compelled, one must note, to place it in a separate position from all other subjects, to render it in a way that broke their own conventions, to depict its presence without depicting its arrival or departure. Because it does not arrive, it does not depart. It is simply there, and then in the cold examination of our evidence, it is there again, and again, and again. The gaps between documented encounters are not evidence of absence. They are evidence of the limits of our record keeping. The encounters themselves, across every century and continent the research touches, are consistent to a degree that no coincidence can explain and no shared cultural transmission can account for. The horror does not lie in what it does. It lies in what it does not need to do. He came again. He sat at the foot of my bed and watched me with those hollow eyes. I asked him, as I have asked him every night for 6 weeks, what he wanted. He did not answer. He never answers. I have begun to suspect the question itself is wrong. He does not want anything. He simply is, and he has always been. Final journal entry, Captain Warren Hoole, recovered November 14, 2003, aboard the vessel Amaranthine, Greenwich Bay, Connecticut. Warren Hoole was 53 years old when he disappeared. He had been sailing the New England coastline for 27 years. He was, by all available accounts from the marina community, exactly the kind of man you would want in charge of a boat in rough weather. Methodical, unexcitable, constitutionally resistant to drama. His ex-wife, Margaret, told investigators that the most alarmed she'd ever seen Warren was the time a black bear wandered into their campsite in 1994, and even then, he'd simply clapped his hands and waited for it to leave. His college roommate from UConn said Warren Hoole was the only man he'd ever met who could receive genuinely bad news and respond to it as though he were reading a weather report. Mild, steady, already thinking about what came next. He had no diagnosed mental health conditions. He had no history of substance abuse. He had gone out on the Amaranthine alone for a standard 2-week research survey. He was contracted by a small coastal preservation nonprofit, tagging migratory bird populations, and had planned to radio in every 48 hours. He radioed in on days 2, 4, and 6. The day 6 transmission was slightly shorter than usual. The person manning the radio at the nonprofit, a graduate student named Emily Cho, said nothing seemed wrong exactly. She used the word compressed, like he was trying to say everything he needed to say in fewer words than usual. She thought maybe he'd caught a cold and wasn't feeling like talking. On day 8, he didn't call. His boat was found on day 11, anchored in a small cove south of Watch Hill, Rhode Island. Everything aboard was in order. His research equipment was logged and cataloged. His food stores were nearly untouched. He'd been eating very little for the last several days based on what remained. His field journals were complete through day 9. The personal journal, the one you just heard from, contained 22 entries. The final entry was dated November 11, 2003. 3 days before the boat was found. 3 days before anyone knew to look for him. The first 18 entries are unremarkable. Bird counts, weather observations, notes about a seal colony he'd spotted near Block Island. Entry 19 contains a single curious line. Strange night, bad dreams maybe, felt watched. Warren Hoole, the most unexcitable man anyone had ever met, thought it was worth writing down that he felt watched. Entry 20 talks about something he'd seen at the foot of his bunk when he woke at 2 a.m. He describes it carefully. That's the thing that stays with you when you read it. He doesn't panic on the page. He doesn't dissolve into exclamation points. He documents it the way he documented everything else in his life, with the patient, measured precision of a man who believed that whatever was happening probably had an explanation, and that the explanation would reveal itself if he was patient enough to wait for it. The thing at the foot of his bed was white. It was crouched. It was watching him. He wrote, assumed exhaustion, stress artifact. Closed my eyes, and when I opened them it was gone. Ate some crackers, went back to sleep. He was wrong about the explanation. He was very, very wrong. Warren Hoole had a daughter. Her name was Claire, and she was 26 when her father disappeared, and she'd been pushing him to retire from solo voyaging for the better part of 3 years. Not because she thought the ocean was dangerous, exactly, but because she thought he was lonely out there, and loneliness was the thing in the Hoole family that went unacknowledged and unaddressed across at least 2 generations that she could trace. Her grandfather had died alone in a Veterans Administration facility in 1978, surrounded by nurses who were kind to him, and no family members who came. Her grandmother had outlived him by 22 years, and never once talked about the marriage, the war, or the 34 years she'd spent in a house that was quiet in ways that had nothing to do with sound. Claire thought her dad carried that quietness with him onto the boat. She thought it was the thing that made him seem unflappable, that he'd been trained from childhood to receive the worst and swallow it without drama, and that the open water was the only place he could finally be quiet on the outside and the inside simultaneously. She had asked him once if he was happy. He'd thought about it for a moment, a real moment, not the quick deflect non-answer she'd been half expecting, and said, "I'm all right, Claire Bear. I think I'm mostly all right." She decided to take that. What Claire knows now, what she has been living with for 20 years, is that her father stopped being mostly all right somewhere around day 7 of that survey. She has read the journal entries. The investigators let her read them, which they probably shouldn't have, and which she is grateful for in the complicated way you become grateful for information that destroys your ability to sleep without pharmaceutical assistance. Entry 21 was written at 4 a.m. on November 10th. Warren Hoole, who documented everything with the patient precision of a man who believed in the redemptive power of careful observation, wrote 4 sentences. It came back. Same position, same eyes. I think it has been there every night. The word think is the one that wrecks you. Warren Hoole didn't write think when he was certain. When he documented a black-headed gull at a latitude where they rarely appeared, he didn't hedge. When he noted the barometric pressure dropping before a squall, he didn't soften it with qualifications. He wrote what he observed plainly and moved on. He wrote think because some part of him, the part trained from earliest childhood to absorb the worst without flinching, was still trying to leave himself an exit, still trying to maintain the possibility that it was exhaustion, that it was the isolation playing tricks, that whatever he was seeing at the foot of his bunk in the small hours of those November mornings was internal, temporary, and resolvable. He had been a surveyor his whole life. He knew the difference between what you see when you're tired and what you see when there's something there. He wrote think anyway, because the alternative, the implication of certainty, was something his careful, steady, unexcitable mind was not yet prepared to accommodate. Entry 22 was written in a different hand pressure, harder. The pen had gone through the page at 2 points. It is the one that opened this story, and then the journal stops, and then Warren stops, and somewhere in the cold, unremarkable water off the coast of Watch Hill, Rhode Island, in the small hours of November 11th, 2003, something that had been watching him every night for nearly 2 weeks became the last thing Warren Hoole ever saw. He was 53 years old. He had a daughter who called him every Sunday. He made exceptional chili. He was mostly all right. October 29 th 2003, approximately 11 p.m. You understand the rationalizing, right? You've done it yourself. Most people have. You hear something in the hallway at 3 a.m. and you lie very still and you listen, and then you tell yourself it's the building settling, or the cat, or the couple upstairs. You tell yourself this not because you are cowardly, but because your brain, that extraordinary, exquisitely calibrated survival instrument, has done a rapid cost-benefit analysis and determined that the most energy-efficient explanation is almost always the right one. Pipes contract in the cold. Animals make noise. Floorboards flex. The brain is very, very good at finding the cheap exit. Warren Hoole's brain was extraordinary at this. He'd spent 53 years training it. You don't solo voyage the North Atlantic without developing a very robust relationship with the difference between things that require immediate attention and things that don't. The weather, the instrument readings, the sound of a line going slack that shouldn't go slack. These were the things that required attention. Dreams were not. Shadows were not. The ambiguous shape at the periphery of a tired man's vision in the middle of a cold November night was absolutely, categorically not. So he went back to sleep. After entry 19, after the first night, he made himself a cup of instant coffee, spent 10 minutes at the wheel checking the anchor hold, wrote, felt watched in his journal the same way another man might have written slight headache, nodding it, filing it, moving past it, and went back to sleep for 4 more hours. He told himself, you're alone, you're tired. The brain produces artifacts under isolation. He knew this. He'd read about it. Sailors on long, single-handed voyages had been hallucinating companions since the first sailor had the first long voyage. It was documented. It was understood. It was human. What his rationalizing brain did not account for, what it could not have accounted for, because the accommodation would have required entirely restructuring his model of reality, was that the shape he'd seen was not a soft-focus artifact of exhaustion. It was not the brain painting a companion over an empty space. It was geometrically specific. The proportions were wrong in a way that dreams usually aren't, because dreams tend to feel familiar even when they're strange. This had felt precisely the opposite, alien in its specificity. Too real in exactly the ways hallucinations are supposed to be too vague. But he'd gone back to sleep, and the next day was fine. The birds were where they were supposed to be. The weather was behaving. His instruments all read normal. The coffee was hot and the sea was flat, and Warren Hoole was a man who trusted evidence, and the evidence told him that last night had been a bad dream. The evidence was lying. The evidence didn't know what was living in the space between his certainty and the dark. On night 4, he woke at 2 a.m. with the absolute, physical, animal conviction that something was in his cabin. Not a feeling, not a dream, the certainty. He lay still for 60 seconds, measuring it, trying to apply the rational override that had served him so well for 5 decades. His heart was doing something he didn't like, fast and specific, the kind of fast that isn't about caffeine. He opened his eyes. At the foot of his bunk, crouched against the wall, white as exposed bone, something was watching him with eyes that had no white in them at all. He blinked, it was gone. He wrote in his journal the next morning that he'd had a second bad night. He wrote that he was going to monitor his caffeine intake and ensure he was getting adequate sleep. He wrote that the barometric pressure was dropping slightly and that tomorrow might be rough. He wrote nothing about the eyes. He was not ready for what writing it down would mean. November 1 SD 2003, 6:47 a.m. He should have turned around on day 8. That's the line that Claire Hoole has repeated in every interview she's given, in therapy, in the support group she joined for families of the maritime missing, in the long phone calls with her mother that started happening after the boat was found. He should have turned the Amaranthin around on day 8 and come home. He knew something was wrong. He absolutely knew. Journal entry 20 was written at 3 a.m. with a hand that medical examiners, reviewing the document, noted showed signs of tremor slight, possibly stress-induced, but there. Warren Hoole's hands had been documented in earlier journals and in his professional life as exceptionally steady. The man could thread a hook in 6-foot swells. By entry 20, his hand was shaking. He knew. But here's the thing about Warren Hoole. And it's the thing that Claire says she understands now, even though it broke something in her when she realized it. He had never been the kind of man who turned around. Not once. Not in 53 years. His mother had called that stubbornness, and his ex-wife had called it pride, and his college roommate had called it one of his best qualities, depending on the context. Warren Hoole, once on a path, stayed on the path. You finished what you started. You didn't fold because of bad nights. You didn't radio the marina because you'd had a couple of vivid dreams and your hands were a little unsteady. You didn't let the work down. He had signed a contract. He had 18 more days on the survey. He had a methodology and a route and a bird count that was the most complete anyone had attempted in that coastal corridor since the early 90s. He was not the kind of man who turned around because something scared him in the dark. So on day 8, he made a choice. He stayed. He told himself it would stop, that whatever was happening was internal, manageable, temporary. He told himself that the completion of the work would be the cure, that once he was home, in his apartment in New Haven, with the TV on and the traffic audible through the window and other human beings within shouting distance, the nights would be normal again. He told himself a lot of things on day 8. The thing at the foot of his bunk listened to none of them. It crouched in the dark with its 2 long fingers and its hollow eyes, and it watched him make the worst decision of his life. And it waited, the way it had always waited, the way it had always done everything, with perfect, patient, indifferent stillness. And here is the part nobody talks about, the part left out of every news report, every official account, every interview, because the people who knew, the ones who were actually there, made a decision. They decided some things were better left unsaid. They were wrong, and tonight you're going to hear why. He came again. He sat at the foot of my bed and watched me with those hollow eyes. Warren Hoole, November 11th, 2003. He came again. He sat at the foot of my bed and watched me with those hollow eyes. The sentence reads the same both times. The sentence reads the same both times. This is the part of the Hoole case that investigators officially attributed to psychological deterioration, consistent with prolonged isolation. The way certain phrases repeat across the final 3 entries of the personal journal. The way the handwriting becomes not messier, not the expected degradation of a man coming apart, but smaller, more careful, as though he were trying very hard to make each letter precise while something very large pressed in from all sides. His cabin was 11 feet long, 7 feet wide. He had been in it for 11 days. The berth was made when the boat was found, not slept in and made as though it had not been slept in at all. The pillow centered, the blanket smooth. Either Warren Hoole was extraordinarily tidy in his final days, or he had stopped sleeping in his bunk. The second plate. This is the detail that appears in the Coast Guard's incident report and is mentioned once and never again. In the forward galley of the Amaranthan, there were 2 plates on the small table. Both had been washed. Both were clean. Warren Hoole had provisioned the boat for 1 person because he was 1 person. He had 2 plates because the boat's galley kit came with 2 plates. The second plate was warm when the Coast Guard officer touched it. The second plate was warm. The officer noted this in his report. He noted it carefully, the way a person notes a thing they intend to return to and then never quite does. The investigation moved on. The rational explanation was sought. The rational explanation was found, more or less. The galley had been in direct sunlight for 2 hours before the boat was boarded, and the ambient temperature in the small space could have produced residual warmth in the plate's surface. This explanation was accepted. No one asked what was on the plate before it was washed. No one asked why Warren Hoole, a man who documented migratory birds and barometric pressure, and the exact latitude of every seal sighting, apparently washed a plate clean without noting what he'd used it for. No one asked whether a man in psychological deterioration, increasingly terrified, increasingly sleepless, would take the time to wash his dishes. The things that were wrong were small. Each one had an explanation. Together they built something for which no explanation was adequate. Emily Cho, the nonprofit graduate student who received Warren Hoole's last radio check-in on day 6, spent 3 years telling herself that she had not noticed anything wrong in that final transmission. She gave this version of events to the Coast Guard, to the insurance investigators, to the Maritime Safety Board. In 2006, she gave a different version to a researcher named James Allen, who was compiling accounts of the rake phenomenon for a private archive. She said the radio check-in lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She said Warren spoke clearly and answered all the standard survey questions accurately. She said she was about to sign off when there was a pause longer than radio static, longer than a bad connection. And then he said, very quietly, "Emily." She said yes. He said, "If I don't call on day 8, send someone quickly." She asked if everything was all right. He said, "It's here during the day now." She asked what was there during the day. The transmission ended. She told herself for 3 years, that the connection had just dropped, that it referred to weather, to a system moving in, to a technical problem with the equipment. She told herself there were 600 rational explanations, and she had simply been too surprised in the moment to ask him to clarify. But she had not told the investigators about "send someone quickly." She had not told them about "it's here during the day now." She had heard the difference in his voice, Warren Hoole, the most unexcitable person she had ever spoken to, the human equivalent of a flat barometric reading. And she had heard something in his voice that she has never been able to name, that she still cannot name, that she describes only as the sound a person makes when they have been scared for a very long time and have finally stopped pretending they are not scared. She asked James Allen in 2006 if Warren had been found. Allen told her no. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you think whatever he was describing, do you think it came from the water? Or do you think it was already on the boat when he went aboard?" Allen told her he didn't know. She said, "I think it was already there. I think it was there before he left the dock. I think it had been there for a while. And I think it knew that he would come back." What you just heard was only the beginning. James Allen's archive, 73 documented accounts collected between 2003 and 2009, covering 8 countries and 4 centuries of primary sources, was submitted to 3 academic journals. All 3 declined to publish it. The reasons given were methodological. The reasons Allen believed were something closer to, "This is real and publishing it makes it more real, and no one wants to be the institution that made it more real." The archive exists. It is not online. It is not in any library catalog. There are 11 physical copies in 11 locations that Allen has never disclosed. He sent the author of this script a single chapter. The chapter is about the eyes. Across 73 accounts, spanning 4 centuries and 5 continents, every witness who provided a physical description included the same detail about the eyes. Not the lack of whites, though that is consistent. Not the position wide set, low in a face whose proportions are not right. The detail that every witness includes, independently without prompting, is this: the eyes do not move. In a human being, even a sleeping human being, even a person in a coma, the eyes move. Rapid, involuntary, constant microadjustments. Your eyes are moving right now. They have never in your life been entirely still. The musculature of the human eye is incapable of true stillness. This is documented neurologically, physiologically, absolutely. The entity's eyes do not move. It watches without tracking. It sees without looking. The witnesses who describe this most fully are the ones who were watched repeatedly, not once but over several nights, because the single encounter witnesses sometimes mistake the stillness for distance, for darkness, for the unreliability of their own perception. The multiple encounter witnesses are certain. One of them, a woman in rural Yorkshire, England, 1994, wrote in her own account. It was as though the eyes themselves were not what was seeing me, as though seeing was happening through them, not with them. The house was quiet when the investigators came to speak to her. The lights were off in the back bedroom. She did not explain why. She showed them to the front room and offered tea and answered every question carefully, and then, at the end, she said one more thing. She said, "Ask me how long I saw it." They asked. She said 9 nights, and it never blinked once. She told him the house was quiet for a Tuesday. Bridge sentence, 3 days later, it had a name in a police report. For the first time in 4 centuries of documented encounters, it had a name. November 19th, 2003, 3:14 a.m. The name Rake does not appear in any document prior to November 2003. The origin of the designation is a post on an early internet forum that has since been deleted, preserved only in screen capture archives maintained by the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. The username of the original poster, unknown. The post described a pale, hairless figure crouched at the foot of a bed in a rural home in upstate New York. The detail that gave it the name, hands. Fingers extended to roughly triple the length of a normal adult human's, curved inward at rest. The commenter below the original post wrote, "Sounds like a rake." The name stuck. The entity had existed for 17,000 years before someone online gave it a 2-syllable nickname. Witness Marcus Chen, IT professional, Albany, NY 2003. I woke up because the dog was making a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not barking, not growling, just this low, continuous sound like she was trying to shrink into the floor without moving. I looked at the end of the bed and I thought for a second it was someone who'd broken in, like a person. Except it wasn't built like a person. The arms were wrong. It was just crouching there, looking at me. I turned on the lamp and it was gone. The dog didn't make another sound for 4 days. She just sat in the corner of the kitchen and shook. Narrator RETURNS, Marcus Chen, filed a police report the following morning. He was the first person to use the word rake in an official document. The investigating officer noted possible trespassing and found no evidence of forced entry. The report was closed within 48 hours. December 3 RD, 2003. First academic cross-reference. Dr. Patricia Graves, professor of folklore at Cornell University, submitted a research note to the Journal of American Folklore flagging the online rake accounts as an emerging urban legend with potential links to pre-existing folklore traditions. She identified 17 visual characteristics shared across early online accounts. She then ran those characteristics against her database of pre-internet folklore from North America, Western Europe, and South Asia. 17 characteristics. 17 matches across 200 years of separate, unconnected folklore traditions. She pulled the note before publication. When a colleague asked her why, she said, "Because it's not a legend." June 17th, 1994, HARROJTE, North Yorkshire, England. Margaret Holt, 44, retired primary school teacher, purchased a semi-detached farmhouse on the outskirts of Harrogate following her divorce. No children, no pets, no prior history of psychological illness, per records obtained from her GP. Called West Yorkshire Police at 4:23 a.m. on June 17th. Call duration, 6 minutes, 41 seconds. Transcript available in the Allen Archive, reproduced here with identifying information changed per Holt family request. Holt, there's something in my bedroom. Can you describe what you're seeing? Holt, it's at the end of the bed. I don't know how to describe it. It's white, very white. It's crouched down. It's looking at me. Operator, is it a person? No. Operator, Mrs. Holt, are you in any immediate danger? I don't know. It's not. It hasn't moved. It's just watching me. Operator, how long has it been there? I don't know. I woke up and it was there. I don't know how long. Operator, units are on their way. Can you stay on the line? Holt, it knows I'm on the phone. Operator, Mrs. Holt, Holt, it just tilted its head. Operator, Mrs. Holt, are you still there? Holt, very quietly, it's still here. Witness Margaret Holt, 44, Harrogate, North Yorkshire, 1994. The police arrived in 12 minutes. By the time they came upstairs, it was gone. They went through the whole house. Nothing. No way in, no way out, nothing disturbed. The officer asked me if I might have been dreaming. I was still sitting on my bed. I hadn't moved since I first saw it. I was still holding the phone. I showed him the phone. I thought if I could show him the call was real, he would understand that I was real. He was very kind. He told me to get some rest. Narrator RETURNS. She saw it again on June 18th, June 19th, June 20th through June 26th. On the 9th night, June 26th, it came close enough to the head of the bed that she could describe the sound it made. The sound was breathing, slow, regular, patient. It breathed the same way for 9 nights in a row, she said. The exact same rhythm, the exact same depth, as if it had been breathing that way long before Margaret Holt existed and would continue long after. She moved out on June 27th. The next tenants moved in on September 3rd. They lasted 41 days. The file ends there. What it cannot record is what it cost to find it, and what it means for everyone who has ever woken in the dark with the certainty of being watched. The mythology is consistent across every culture that has documented it. In Algonquian oral tradition of the northeastern woodlands, Chenu, not identical Algonquian oral traditions describe various entities, but among the Abenaki people specifically, there are accounts collected by anthropologist Frank Speck in the early 20th century of a watching figure. White, crouched, observed only from beds, only at night, never attacking. The Abenaki did not have a single name for it. The closest translation of the descriptive phrase they used is, the one who is already there. In Japanese folklore, a subset of accounts within the broader Yurei tradition describes an entity distinct from standard ghost lore. No face visible, no emotional quality attributed, no grudge, no purpose, no history, simply present at the bed's foot. Accounts collected by Lafcadio Hearn in the 1890s contain 3 such descriptions, filed under the category he labeled Watchers in his private notebooks. These notebooks were not published in his lifetime. In Slavic folk tradition, Eastern Polish and Western Ukrainian accounts describe an entity called Prizrak, literally, the observer. Same posture, same white coloration, same behavior, pure observation, no aggression, no apparent purpose. Documented in a regional monastery's records from 1647 as something seen by a monk on 17 consecutive nights. The monk's final record of the encounter states, "I asked what it required of me. I received no answer. I have begun to think it requires nothing. The watching is not the means. The watching is the end." Dr. Pavel Novotny, professor of Slavic folklore, Charles University, Prague, 2018. The cross-cultural consistency here is not explicable by diffusion. These traditions developed in isolation from one another. The detail level matching, the posture, the coloration, the specific behavior of observation without aggression. This is not a shared story. This is a shared experience. What I am about to tell you is documented. It is on record. It exists in files that are technically public but practically inaccessible. I found them. I read every page. You need to hear what is inside, because what happened once is still happening. That was the last normal thought he would have. And here's the thing about the people who start seeing it. Nobody runs. You think they would. You think the rational move, and God knows you'd be right, in some detached, outside-looking-in way, would be to get out of the house, get out of the room, get in the car, go anywhere that isn't the place where the thing crouches and watches in the dark. But they don't. Ask Claire Houle. Ask Margaret Holt. Ask any of the people in Allen's archive who saw it more than once. Nobody runs. The researcher who spent the most time trying to understand this behavioral pattern was a woman named Dr. Sarah Whitmore, a cognitive psychologist from the University of Michigan, who encountered the rake accounts in 2005 and spent 3 years trying to explain the non-flight response before concluding, in a paper she published in a small psychology journal, and then immediately regretted. that the entity may be producing some form of a threat response paralysis in witnesses. Not through any chemical mechanism she could identify, but through something in the visual presentation of absolute stillness and absolute attention that short-circuits the brain's threat assessment system. Her theory, the brain cannot classify something that is simultaneously threatening and non-threatening. It is in the room which triggers alarm. It is not doing anything which triggers reassessment. The reassessment finds it is still there. The alarm fires again. The reassessment recalibrates. The alarm fires. The cycle runs in a loop, and while it runs, the person lies very still and watches the thing that is watching them and does not run. Because running requires a decision, and decision-making requires the cycle to resolve, and the cycle does not resolve. It is, Whitmore wrote, the most effective predatory stillness mechanism I have encountered in any documented biological or folkloric context. She used the word predatory carefully. She spent a paragraph justifying it. Then she spent another paragraph walking it back. Then she left it in the final draft because it was the most accurate word she had. The accounts in Allen's archive that describe multiple night encounters, 14 of the 73, all describe the same progression. Night 1, shock. Night 2, dread. Night 3 through 5, a terrible, paralyzing familiarity. By the end of the first week, witnesses describe not fear exactly, but something they struggle to name. Something that sounds, reading the accounts, very much like the specific horror of intimacy you did not choose. It knows you're awake. You know it's there. You have both known this every night for a week. Whatever ordinary fear might have produced in the first encounter has been replaced by something worse. The feeling of being known by something you cannot know back. The feeling that whatever is watching you has always been watching you. That the bed, the room, the dark, these are not yours. They never were. There was one account in Allen's archive that offered something that looked briefly like hope. A retired police officer from Christchurch, New Zealand, a man named David Tane, 61 years old, to tour as a detective, more composed under pressure than almost anyone Allen had spoken to, who had seen it for 11 nights in the summer of 2007, and who, on the 12th night, took action. He'd thought about it carefully, the way he'd thought about every difficult situation in his professional life. He decided that whatever it was, it occupied physical space, and physical space could be challenged. So on night 12, when it appeared in its usual position at the foot of his bed, David Tane did not lie still. He sat up. He turned on the bedside lamp. He said out loud, in the steady voice he'd used for 3 decades with suspects in interrogation rooms, "You need to leave." It tilted its head. That's all. That single response, the head tilting at an angle the human neck doesn't quite reach, and then it was still again, watching him in the lamplight, its eyes not moving, not blinking, not tracking, its breathing by then audible to Tane in the silence of his house, unchanged. He said, "You need to leave," 2 more times. On the 3rd time, it stood up. Tane told Allen that his first reaction was relief, that the standing was something, was movement, was response, was evidence of something that could respond to human speech. He told himself, in the 3 seconds between it standing and what happened next, that he had found the solution, that he had simply needed to confront it. "I thought," he told Allen, "that I had one." It walked to the side of the bed. It was upright, and the proportions were worse upright, the limbs at the wrong ratios. The posture suggesting a body that had not evolved in the gravity this planet provided. It walked to the side of the bed, and it leaned down, and its face was approximately 8 inches from David Tane's face, and he could see the eyes clearly, and they were not moving, and they were not blinking, and they were not looking at him in any way that the word looking adequately describes. And then it turned around and left the room. He didn't see how it left. The room simply had it in it and then didn't. He moved out the next morning. He was shaking when he packed his car, and he was still shaking 6 hours later when he reached his sister's house in Dunedin, and the shaking did not fully stop for 3 weeks. He told Olin, "I thought the standing meant it could be reasoned with, that it had heard me. It didn't hear me. What it did coming to my bedside like that wasn't a response to what I said." He paused. It was a correction. I'd misunderstood the arrangement. It came close to make sure I understood, and I did. After that, I understood perfectly. The hope was gone. What replaced it was worse. October 14th, 2019, 11:43 p.m. Melissa Varga was a 37-year-old occupational therapist from Portland, Oregon, who had rented a cabin in the Mount Hood National Forest for what she described in subsequent accounts as a necessary reset. She was recovering from a difficult year. The divorce had been finalized in February. She'd spent the spring and summer being relentlessly, exhaustingly fine, and by October she needed 2 weeks of no one asking her if she was okay. She would later say that she does not remember falling asleep on the first night. She was reading, and then she was not reading, and then she was awake in the dark with the specific consciousness of someone who woke not from a dream but from a presence. She did not scream. This is the part she says she cannot explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it, the absence of screaming. She was terrified. She was, she says, more afraid in that moment than she has been at any other point in her life, including when a car ran a red light into her driver's side door at 45 miles an hour in 2011, and she had the full, clear, measured thought that she was probably about to die. That had been fear with action. She'd braced. She'd turned the wheel. She'd done things. This was fear without action, fear with nowhere to go. It was crouched at the foot of the bed in the mountain dark, and it was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the light available, and its fingers were spread against the wooden floor, and the length of them was wrong. She could see it clearly enough to know that, and clearly enough to see that the eyes were open and wide and had no white in them, and were completely, absolutely, impossibly still. She told herself to move. She could not move. She told herself to scream. Nothing came. She lay in the exact position sleep had left her in on her side, facing the foot of the bed, her hand under her cheek, and she watched it watch her, and the breathing in the room was all wrong because there was too much of it. Her own breathing, and another. Slow, patient, older than the trees outside and the mountain above them and the sky above that. She looked at its hands on the floor, the spread fingers, the extended length of them, the way they curled slightly inward at the tips, as though the muscle memory of crouching had bent them into a permanent parenthetical. And she had a thought she has since described as the most frightening of the entire experience. A thought that wasn't about what it was, or why it was there, or whether she would survive the night. The thought was, it has been watching people wake up in the dark and be afraid of it for so long. For so long. Did it remember the first one? What you just heard was only the beginning. Melissa Varga was found by the cabin rental manager at 9 a.m., sitting on the front porch in 38-degree temperatures in her pajamas. She had been sitting there since approximately 5 a.m. She was coherent. She was functional. She answered questions with the careful, measured patience of someone who has just passed through something enormous and arrived on the other side determined to account for every detail correctly. She said, "It left when the sky started to get light. Not gradually, there was a moment where the room had it and then the room didn't, like a switch." She said, "I want to be very clear. I am not a person who sees things. I do not have a history of this. I do not believe in," she paused here, visibly reconsidering what she'd been about to say, because whatever she'd been about to say had been organized in a pre-October context that no longer applied. "I did not previously believe in most of what I am about to describe." She gave a full account. She did not embellish. She did not speculate. She described what she had seen with the clinical accuracy of a woman who had spent 15 years documenting observable phenomena in therapeutic settings and knew the difference between what she had perceived and what she had inferred. The cabin rental manager, to his credit, wrote it all down. Melissa Varga drove back to Portland the same morning. She slept. that night and the nights following, with every light in her apartment on. She told her therapist the following week that what she was most struggling to articulate was not the fear. The fear was, in retrospect, the least complicated part, but the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of what the world contained. "I don't feel unsafe," she said, in the recorded session that she later gave permission for Alan to quote. "I feel corrected, like I had a map of what existed, and the map was wrong and I've been handed the right one, and I can't figure out how to unfold it." The therapist asked what she meant. She said, "I mean that it's real. It was there. It looked at me all night and it breathed and it was real. And if it's real, it's been real. And if it's been real the whole time, every night I slept without knowing, every night my whole life." She stopped. She looked at the window of the therapist's office. It was daylight. It was a Thursday afternoon in Portland, Oregon, with traffic noise and coffee shops and people walking dogs. She said, "Every night my whole life, something might have been at the foot of my bed, and I just didn't wake up." That was the last ordinary thought she would ever have. I do not use the word normal lightly. I use it the way one might use the word sure, while watching it disappear behind you. And so we arrive at the interior, the place this account has been circling, the dark room inside the skull where the real horror conducts its patient business. You have heard the facts. You have heard the testimony. You have been given the evidence, assembled and dated and cross-referenced with a rigor, designed to convince you of the external reality of what you now carry inside your mind. But I must speak now of what the evidence cannot record. I must speak of what happens after. Not the physical aftermath. Alan has documented that with his characteristic relentlessness. The insomnia, the perceptual disturbances, the inability to enter dark rooms without, as one witness described it, the feeling of the foot of the bed before my eyes adjust to the dark. These are the body's accountable residue, the measurable echo of an encounter the rational mind cannot metabolize. What the body's residue does not explain is what happens to the mind. I have spoken with 11 of the multiple encounter witnesses myself. I must be transparent about this. I have presented myself in this account as an assembler, an editor, a curator of documented horror maintained at a responsible distance. I must confess that this distance has not always been intact. Some portion of what I have assembled from the inside. But that is for later. That is the confession that requires its own preparation. For now, the mind after. Every witness who experienced the rake on more than 3 consecutive nights, and there are 14 such witnesses in the full archive, describes the same cognitive alteration. Not a breakdown, not a dissolution. Something more precise and more disturbing than breakdown, which implies something lost. This is something gained. The witnesses describe becoming, they struggle with the word, they reach for it separately, in separate places and times and languages, and they all arrive at approximately the same destination. They describe becoming aware of the dark in a way they had not been before, not afraid of it, aware of it, aware of its texture, its presence, and here the language becomes strained, its occupation. The dark, after extended encounter with the rake, does not feel empty. It feels, and I choose this word with the care the word demands, attended. I found myself, 3 weeks after my own first encounter, standing in a dark hallway in my home at 2 a.m., and instead of turning on the light, I simply stood there and let my eyes adjust, the way they do, the way eyes always do in darkness given enough time, and I stood there and I thought, what if adjusting is the wrong response? What if the instinct to see is exactly backward? What if whatever is there, in the dark at the end of every hallway, in the space at the foot of every bed, what if it is, precisely, best seen by those who have learned not to look? I turned on the light. The hallway was empty. I think it was empty. I cannot be, entirely certain it was empty. It accelerates, you understand. The internal deterioration accelerates in a way that is not commensurate with the actual frequency of encounter. 2 weeks after my first documented sighting, I had slept perhaps 9 hours total. Not 9 hours in a single night. 9 hours across 14 nights. Each night I lay in the specific posture of the already watched. Still, oriented toward the foot of the bed, eyes in the particular unfocused softness that the dark requires. Nothing came on most nights, nothing came, and yet the absence of it was no more restful than the presence had been. Perhaps less. When it was there was at least a clarity. I knew what I was afraid of. When it was not there, the dread distributed itself everywhere simultaneously. Into the dark behind the door left ajar, into the space beneath the bed that my adult mind had not seriously considered in 30 years. Into the window, though I am on the 4th floor, though there is nothing outside the window but 4 stories of air, though the window is latched though I found myself checking the window latch at 3 a.m. for the 7th night in a row, and telling myself that this was reasonable behavior, this was prudent behavior, this was what any rational person would do in my circumstances, and the voice arguing this case was my own voice, and it was arguing with increasing desperation against something that was not a voice at all but simply a knowing, a cellular, constitutional knowing, that checking the latch was not going to help, that latches are for things that have to enter from outside, that some things, the things we are discussing tonight, are simply, without ceremony or mechanism or explanation, already in the room. If you are still with me, if you have not yet turned away from what we are uncovering together, write in the comments. The walls remember. Let me know I am not alone in this. Let me know someone else is sitting in the dark while I speak and understanding and is awake. Because I find I need the confirmation. The mind under siege of this particular horror does not break cleanly. That is what I am trying to tell you. That is the thing none of the clinical literature prepared me for. It does not shatter. It frays. Frays at the margins first, the places where certainty had always lived most quietly, most unexamined. The certainty that empty rooms are empty, that dark hallways contain nothing but air, that the foot of the bed, after all these years, remains unoccupied. These certainties fray, and what grows through the gaps is not madness, is not, I insist, madness, but something more insidious. A new cartography, a redrawn map of what the world contains. The rake does not need to be in my room to be effective. It needs only to have been there once. The once is sufficient. The once is the seed. What grows from it in the subsequent weeks and months and years is the question I cannot stop asking. The question is whether I am afraid because it is real, or whether. No, I will not entertain that reversal. I refuse it. That way is the abyss the investigators prefer, the abyss of the comfortable rational explanation, the psychological origin, the trauma response, the isolation-induced artifact. I have read these explanations. I have applied them to my own experience with the surgical detachment that 73 accounts and 3 years of research should grant a person. They are insufficient. They are insufficient. The eyes do not move. This is the detail that cannot be explained by psychology, cannot be attributed to the unreliable machinery of the fear brain, cannot be waved away with the word hallucination, and the particular form of condescension that word contains. Hallucinations do not have consistent, measurable, anatomically specific characteristics across 73 independent accounts spanning 4 centuries and 5 continents. The eyes do not move. They have never moved in any account. I am not inventing this. I need you to understand, I am not a person who invents. What I am is a person who has been awake for, I lose count of the nights, now, which is itself a symptom, the symptom you find in the later entries of Hoole's journal, the shortening of the sentences, the narrowing of the recorded world to the single essential thing, the thing at the foot of the bed, the thing that breathes and does not blink and has been watching. I am going to complete this account. I am going to complete it because it is necessary and because there are people who need to know what is in these files, and because leaving you here in this middle, with the evidence half assembled and the worst still ahead, would be a form of cowardice I am not capable of. But I need you to understand what completing it has cost. But do not for one moment believe that you are simply listening to a story. What I am telling you is real. It has always been real. And the reason I know this, the reason I cannot stop, is that it is still happening. Right now, as I speak these words to you in the dark. And so my mind, what remained of it, turned at last to the question I had been circling for days. Not what had I seen, but what precisely had seen me. The question of the rake's origin is not, as its colloquial name suggests, a question that admits of a simple answer. The folkloric research is consistent. This entity has existed alongside human civilization since before the concept of alongside carries useful meaning. The cave record, the manuscript record, the oral tradition record, all of these indicate not a creature that evolved in response to human presence, not a predator that followed the migration patterns of its prey, but something altogether more disturbing. Something that was here when we arrived. The geological and paleontological implications of this are, they are not comfortable to follow to their terminus. The genus Homo in its modern form has occupied this planet for approximately 300,000 years. The rake's documented presence in the cave record extends to at least 17,000 BCE, and the absence of earlier documentation reflects only the absence of earlier documentation. Nothing in the visual evidence of the Lascaux chamber figure suggests novelty. The proportions, the posture, the behavioral presentation, these have not changed in 17,000 years of observable record. They are not the proportions of something that evolved on the same geological timescale as modern fauna. They do not suggest a biological origin that corresponds to any documented evolutionary lineage. Dr. Antonio Stavros, xenobiological theorist, Athens Institute of Advanced Study, 2020. The dimensional consistency of the rake across every documented encounter, the unchanging physical characteristics across millennia, is not consistent with biological life as we understand it. Biological life changes. It adapts. Whatever this is, it has not adapted to us. We have adapted to it in the only way available to us. We have learned to be afraid of it. The question that the documented record raises, the question that Dr. Stavros' research approaches but does not complete, that no research has completed, for reasons that will become apparent, is whether the rake exists in the same ontological register as the physical world we inhabit. The evidence, assembled with the rigor this document demands, suggests it does not. Not entirely. The witnesses who describe the disappearances, all 14 of the multiple encounter accounts, describe the same absence of mechanism. The rake does not leave through doors or windows. It does not move through shadow into adjacent shadow. One moment the room contains it. The next moment the room does not. There is no perceptible transition. This is not consistent with physical movement through three-dimensional space. This is consistent with, and I commit this to record with full understanding of what it will do to any reader still maintaining comfortable distance from the material. This is consistent with an entity that does not move between locations in the conventional sense, because the conventional sense of location does not apply to it in the same way it applies to the physical world it temporarily occupies. The rake does not travel to the foot of your bed. It does not approach from any direction. It is simply there in a way that bypasses the three-dimensional architecture of your room, your house, your world. It has always been there, everywhere, all at once, in the dark at the foot of every bed. Every bed. Always. To describe the rake fully would require a vocabulary that does not exist, not because the description exceeds the limits of current scientific understanding, though it does, but because it exceeds the limits of the cognitive architecture that generates language. The human mind is built, at a fundamental level, to represent a world of discrete objects occupying discrete locations, interacting through chains of physical cause and effect. Remove those axioms, and the mind's representational machinery begins to produce something between language and noise. What the most articulate witnesses have managed to capture. The physical proportions suggest a body that has never been subject to the structural constraints that evolutionary biology imposed on terrestrial organisms. The limbs are wrong not in the way that injury or disease makes them wrong in the way that a geometric proof is wrong when you discover its axiom is false. The wrongness is foundational. The body does not appear to be a variant of recognizable biology. It appears to be a different solution to a problem that biology did not know it was solving. The skin and witnesses are consistent on this, is not skin in the sense that word implies a covering over an interior. It is the outermost stratum of something whose interior organization does not correspond to vertebrate anatomy, or to any anatomy for which a descriptive framework exists. It is white without being pale. It is luminous without producing light. Several witnesses describe it as, and here the language truly begins to deform against the pressure of the reality it is attempting to contain as more present than the physical objects around it, as though ordinary matter were a kind of suggestion, and this were a fact. The eyes. The eyes. I have circled this description 17 times in these notes, and each time the language has failed with the characteristic failure of language encountering something genuinely other. They are dark. They do not reflect light. They do not move. In the extended phenomenological descriptions provided by multiple encounter witnesses, descriptions produced after the initial shock had been processed, descriptions given with the careful retrospective attention of people who knew what they were trying to capture, the eyes are described not as empty but as full, as containing something, a depth, a history, a patience so extreme it registers not as an absence of urgency, but as a presence of something for which urgency is simply not a relevant category. These are eyes that have watched, across whatever span of time they occupy, the rise of civilizations and their ash, the freezing of seas and their thawing, the slow grinding of mountains into sand. These eyes have been watching since before there was anything to watch, and they are watching now, and they will be watching when the watching is all that remains. I cannot describe this adequately. I can tell you that I tried, in person, at 3 a.m., in a bedroom that was dark except for the thin geometry of streetlight through a curtain gap. I can tell you that what I saw in those eyes was not malice, because malice is a human property that requires a human scale, and what I was looking at had no scale I could measure. I can tell you only that language itself felt insufficient, felt like a very small net cast into a very large dark. And I caught nothing. And the dark caught nothing. And the dark went on. The evidence that others knew and were destroyed by knowing is itself a category of the archive that Allen has cataloged separately under a heading that reads, in his characteristically spare notation, subsequent states. The research does not stay academic. This is the fact that no framework of scholarly distance or clinical detachment can ultimately prevent. The rake does not remain a subject. It becomes, to those who study it with sufficient thoroughness, something closer to a relationship. A terrible, non-consensual relationship conducted entirely on the entity's terms, in which one party is entirely aware of the other, and the other party's awareness is the one significant uncertainty. Dr. Patricia Graves of Cornell, who identified the 17 consistent characteristics and then pulled her research note before publication, retired from academic life in 2009 at the age of 51. She did not give a reason. A former graduate student who maintained contact with her described her in 2015 as still sharp, still herself, but she'd stopped reading at night, said the quiet bothered her. She was last known to sleep with all lights on. She has not published since 2009. James Allen himself, the archivist, the collector, the the man who assembled 73 accounts with methodical, almost monastic patience, sent his final communication to this research project in March of 2022. It was 2 sentences. The first, "I am stopping the research." The second, "Not because there is nothing more to find, because finding more has a cost I cannot continue to pay." He did not elaborate. He has not responded to subsequent contact. The monk in the 1647 Polish monastery record, the man who documented 17 consecutive nights of watching and wrote, "I have begun to think it requires nothing. The watching is not the means. The watching is the end," did not write in the monastery's records again after that entry. A subsequent entry by the monastery's abbot notes only that Brother Alexander had been called to a period of contemplation in the eastern cell and would rejoin the community when God so willed. There are no further entries about Brother Alexander. The eastern cell was on the ground floor. It faced east. It had one window. The window faced the forest. What was the monk looking at every night in that eastern cell? What had he been looking at for 17 nights before the abbot moved him? What was looking back? And why, here is the question that will not leave, that sits at the foot of every rational conclusion this research has attempted to reach. Why do the people who look longest always stop looking? Not because they found nothing, because they found the same thing. The same thing. Always. What you just heard was only the beginning. The scale of what the archive implies is not comfortable to articulate. I will articulate it. If the rake is not biological, if it occupies some adjacent dimensional register that touches our own at the point of human sleep, then the implications extend beyond the 14 multiple encounter witnesses, beyond the 73 accounts, beyond the 4 centuries of cross-cultural documentation. They extend to every sleeping human being who has ever existed. The accounts are not special. The witnesses are not special. They are not the rare few who attracted the attention of something that ignores the majority. They are the rare few who woke up. The majority do not wake up. The majority sleep through the night in the dark, while something crouches at the foot of the bed with its unmoving eyes and its ancient breathing and its absolute patience. And in the morning they rise refreshed and think nothing of it, because there is nothing to think, because they did not wake, because waking is the accident, and not waking is the design. What has been described thus far represents only the outermost fragment of the truth, the portion that human language can approximate. What lies beneath that layer, what the deepest accounts suggest, is something for which no preparation is adequate. Nothing that follows can be unheard. You were warned. I know when I crossed the line. That is the thing none of the accounts I had read prepared me for. That the crossing is not a tumble, not a fall, not the dramatic dissolution of a man undone by something beyond comprehension. It is a step, a specific, identifiable, entirely voluntary step. You can feel the line beneath your foot before you lift it. You can feel it still beneath your foot as you lift. You can feel the specific absence of it as you come down on the other side. I crossed it at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, standing in the hallway of my home in the dark, not turning on the light for the 43rd consecutive night. Not because I was afraid of what the light would show, because I was afraid of what it would not. You must understand that this is the central corruption. Not the fear of the dark, but the fear of the light. The specific, insidious, metastasizing dread that the empty room, the confirmed empty room, the room proved empty by the neutral testimony of the light, is somehow the worst answer. That the explanation of nothing is more terrifying after you have been watching and been watched than the explanation of something. Because if it is nothing, if the room is empty, then the 6 weeks of watching were internal, were me, were something growing in the architecture of my own perception. And if that is true, then the watching does not stop because the entity leaves. The watching does not stop at all. And the thing at the foot of the bed is not in the room. It is in me. I obsessed, I obsess, I obsess. The present tense is the honest one over this distinction. The research was the rope I threw myself, the external evidence the proof I demanded. It is real, it is documented, it is in the archive. Other people, sane people, careful people have seen the same thing in the same posture with the same eyes. The research was meant to confirm the external reality of the horror, and in confirming it, diminish it. Instead, it is 4 a.m. in a hallway in November, and I am standing in the dark, because if I turn on the light and the hallway is empty, I will have to choose. And the choosing is the line. And I have not turned on the light. It is a strange thing, it is the strangest thing to become what you study. Alan warned me, not directly, not with words. He warned me in the way the archive warned me, by ending, by the absence of further entries from witnesses who looked too long, who sat too still in the dark, who crossed the line from researcher to participant with the soft, irreversible certainty of a tide changing. I understand Alan now. I understand Brother Alexander and Margaret Holt and David Taine and Melissa Varga and Warren Hoole. God help me. I understand Warren Hoole, not as subjects to be analyzed, but as people who stood where I am standing and felt what I feel, the terrible intimacy of having been seen. Not targeted, not chosen, seen. The distinction is essential, and it is the one that all comfort-seeking collapses on. There is no comfort in being targeted, but there is sense in it. You are special. You are different. You attracted something. There is a reason. The rake does not target. It does not choose. It simply sees with those still, dark, ancient eyes that have no white in them, and the seeing is its own purpose and its own completion. Being seen by something that vast, something that was watching before civilization learned to write down what it watched, does not make you special. It makes you small. It makes you. And this is the word that has been building through every section of this account. The word the research circled and the personal experience confirmed. It makes you negligible. You are a brief occurrence in something's field of vision. You will end. The field of vision will not. And I have spent, I don't count the months now, the way Hoole stopped counting days. I have spent however long it has been sitting in the dark at 4 a.m. understanding this, incorporating it, no longer fighting it. That is what stops being fought, not the fear, the resistance. The resistance ends, and what replaces it is not peace. I want to be clear about this. This is not peace, but something that functions in the exhausted residue of the resistance like acceptance. The cold, bare, cosmological acceptance of something seen and something seeing, patient in opposite directions, one of them temporary. I have not been entirely transparent with you. The account you have been hearing, the research, the archive, the assembled evidence is real. Every document is real. Every witness is real. Every date, every name, every account is as I described it. I have not invented a single fact, but I have withheld one. I withheld it because I am a careful person who understands the difference between evidence and confession. I withheld it because this account is meant to document the rake, not me. I withheld it because, and this is the truth beneath the truth, I was not ready until this moment to say it in a way that committed it to record. I have seen it, not read about it, not assembled accounts of others who have seen it. I have lain in the dark at the foot of my own beds watching in, and I have felt the breathing that is not mine fill the room, and I have opened my eyes and it was there, crouched at the foot of the bed with its extended fingers and its ancient posture and its eyes that do not move. I have seen it 6 times. The first time I thought I was dreaming. The second time I thought I was losing my mind. The third time I thought I had allowed the research to corrupt my perception, had so thoroughly inhabited the accounts of others that I had manufactured the experience myself. By the 4th time I had stopped thinking and was simply lying still in the way the witnesses described, in the specific. Full body stillness that is not sleep and not waking but something between them. The stillness of a creature that has been seen and knows it, and has no good options, and has learned to be still. By the fifth time, I understood Margaret Holt. I understood what she meant when she said, "Ask me how long I saw it." The question was not about duration. The question was about recognition. She had wanted someone to ask so that she could tell them. I was not afraid by the end. I was acquainted. The sixth time, it was closer than it had been before. Not at the foot of the bed, beside the bed. It's breathing close enough that I will say this once and then I will stop, because there is a thing the Poe sections of this account have been approaching, and I will say it now. It's breathing close enough that I could feel it, warm and slow, against the side of my face. I closed my eyes. I said nothing. I did not move. In the morning, I was alone. The sentence I have been avoiding saying. I think I have been alone in every sense that matters. Enough of the academic distance. What was found in that room deserves to be described as it was, in full, in light, with nothing hidden. On February 9th, 2009, in a rental property in rural Brittany, France, a photographer named Camille Rouse set up a motion-sensing camera in her bedroom after 4 nights of what she described, in her subsequent account, as the conviction, every night of company. She placed the camera on the dresser, oriented toward the foot of the bed, with a motion sensitivity threshold calibrated to exclude the movement of the curtains in the draft from the old window frame. The camera was triggered at 3:17 a.m. The footage exists. It has been reviewed by 6 independent parties, including a visual effects professional who was tasked with identifying digital manipulation, and found none. It is not in the public domain. 1 copy is in Allen's archive. 1 copy was submitted to a documentary filmmaker who declined to use it on grounds that will become clear. What the footage shows in the greenish gray of the night vision sensor, crouched at the foot of Camille Rouseau's bed, a figure. The description in clinical language has been sufficient until now. Clinical language is no longer what this moment requires. What the footage shows, and what those who have reviewed it describe with remarkable consistency, is this: a body that suggests a skeleton that grew wrong. The bones visible at the joints, knees, knuckles, the angle of the elbows, are pronounced in a way that implies a body with insufficient flesh to cover the architecture underneath, or a body whose flesh has been organized differently, distributed on a chassis that does not match what flesh is meant to cover. The neck is wrong, not grotesquely wrong. Wrong in the way that a sentence is wrong when one word is out of place. You read it, you understand it, and something in you catches on the wrongness even as the meaning goes through. The neck is set at the angle that the head would occupy if the head were meant to face a direction the human body cannot face. The hands. The footage shows the hands clearly. The fingers are spread against the bed's footboard, bracing the crouch, and the length of them is, the camera's resolution is 1080p HD, and in the night vision mode the detail is sufficient to count the joints. There are 4 joints per finger, not 3, 4. Camille Rouse, reviewing the footage the next morning, watched it 17 times. She told the documentary filmmaker, "In the moment in the dark, it was terrifying. Looking at the footage, looking at it in the daytime on a screen with coffee in my hand, it is something else. I don't have the word for it. It is complete. It is the most complete thing I have ever looked at. Like it has all of itself accounted for. Like nothing is missing. Like everything it is fully." She watched it an 18th time. She said, "I think it is beautiful." She said it with the specific horror of a person who has discovered an aesthetic response where no aesthetic response was supposed to exist, with the look of a person who has been shown something terrible and found that terrible and beautiful are not, at that distance, opposites. What does it want? Every account across every century contains this question. The witnesses ask it in the first encounter, in the last encounter, in the accounts given to researchers and investigators and therapists and archivists. Every person who has lain in the dark and felt the weight of its watching presence has asked, in the first or 15th or 50th night, what does it want from me? The question is the most human thing about the encounter, to be watched and to seek purpose in the watching. To need the watching to be about something, to be for something, is the default response of a species that has organized its entire cosmological understanding around the premise of meaning. We see an eye and we look for a mind behind it. We find a mind and we look for a motivation. We find a motivation and we feel, briefly, the comfort of a universe that makes sense, that runs on cause and effect, that wants things we can respond to. The rake does not want. This is the horror at the center of the horror, not the wrongness of the body, not the unmoving eyes, not the breathing in the dark, patient and enormous. The horror is that after everything, after all the watching, all the proximity, all the terrible intimacy of being seen by something ancient and vast, the watching has no purpose beyond itself. It is not studying you. It is not feeding on your fear, despite the tempting elegance of that explanation. It is not gathering information, building towards something, waiting for a moment of culmination that will reveal the transaction's nature. It watches you the way the universe watches you, without witnessing, without caring, without even the basic category of observation that requires a subject. It watches you the way time watches you, the way gravity watches you. You are there, and it is there, and the watching is simply what fills the space between you. And here is the thing that Camille Rousseau's footage suggests, the thing that her response to the footage begins to illuminate. There is craft in what it is. There is, in the geometry of the wrongness, in the specific arrangement of the too long fingers and the forward-leaning neck, and the eyes that are too dark to be eyes, something that the purely biological cannot account for. It is, in some sense, that resists clean articulation made for this. It is made to crouch at the foot of beds, made to breathe in the dark, made for the specific act of watching sleeping things, for the specific moment when the sleeping thing wakes and finds itself watched. The body is calibrated for this. The eyes are calibrated for this. Which means, and this is where the beautiful, terrible distinction collapses into something without a name, that we are calibrated for this too. We are calibrated to wake, to see, to lie still under the weight of being seen. We evolved the capacity to be paralyzed by this specific horror. We evolved eyes that know, at some pre-linguistic level, what it means to find those eyes looking back. We evolved together, it and us, prey in. Not predator, witness. We evolved as the thing it watches. We are its purpose. Not its prey, its context. The specific, brief biological context in which the watching makes sense. That is what happened to the body of knowledge. Now I will tell you what happened to the body. March 3 RD 2007, Christchurch, New Zealand. The physical encounter, record that the archive has avoided fully describing until now. What happens when the rake moves? David Taine experienced it. His account, given to Allen, covers the bedside approach in more detail than his public testimony. The detail he omitted from later retellings. The detail he gave Allen only after 3 hours of conversation, in a bar in Dunedin, with 2 glasses of whiskey between him and the subject, concerns what he saw when it leaned its face close to his. The skin. Up close in the lamplight, the skin was not the uniform white of distant viewing. It was Taine struggled here, reaching for the language and finding it inadequate and continuing anyway, because that is what witnesses do when the inadequacy is less terrible than the silence. It was organized, patterned, not like a disease and not like decoration, like something structural, like the grain in old wood, like the striations in old stone, like something that had been in place long before the flesh that showed it. He said, I thought, and I know how this sounds, I thought it looked old. Not aged, old. The difference is an aged thing decays. This wasn't decaying. This had been old for longer than decay is a relevant concept. Its breath at 8 inches was warm. Taine had expected cold. Everything else suggested cold, the white, the stillness, the indifference, the absence of biological affect. The breath was warm, humid, the specific temperature of a living thing in a warm room. He said, the breath was the worst part, because the breath was ordinary. The breath was exactly what my breath would have been in that position. And I thought, it breathes. It breathes the way I breathe. It is alive in the way I am alive. And the distance between us right then was the distance between its face and my face, and that distance was 8 inches, and I couldn't move, and it turned around, it left the room. But in the precise moment before it turned, in the single, crystalline second that Taine has described to Alan, and to no one else, and that has formed the unshakable foundation of everything this script has been building toward, it did something that none of the other accounts describe. It opened its mouth. It made no sound. But Taine says, Taine insists, with the steady, detective certainty of a man who spent his career trusting his own observations, that it was trying to. This is the part that was edited out, cut from every version you have ever encountered, because someone decided you could not handle the truth of what was found in that place. They were trying to be kind. I am not going to be kind. You asked for the truth. Here it is. What you just heard was only the beginning. What remains after the worst moment, a world made permanently different by what it has been shown, is in it. The footage from Camille Rousseau's camera was reviewed by a visual effects professional, as stated, who found no evidence of digital manipulation. This professional, who has worked on major Hollywood productions, whose career is built on knowing the difference between what a camera captures and what is constructed after the fact, submitted his analysis in writing. The analysis contains one non-standard paragraph at the end after the technical findings. It reads in full. I have spent 20 years creating things on screen that don't exist. I know what something real looks like versus what something manufactured looks like. The technical analysis is above. My personal conclusion, which is not the conclusion you hired me for, but which I am including because I would not sleep if I didn't, is that what is in this footage is real. I don't know what it is. I know that it is real. I'm sorry this isn't more useful. He declined all subsequent contact regarding the footage. The documentary filmmaker who received the footage, the one who declined to use it, was asked why. She said, because if I put it in the film, people will see it. And I thought about the people seeing it, coming to the end of the film in their living rooms in the dark and seeing what I saw on that screen. And then the film ending and the room being quiet, and them sitting there in the quiet in their homes and looking at the foot of the couch. And I thought, I don't have the right to do that to people. I don't have the right to show them something they can't unsee and send them home with it. She paused. I still watch the footage sometimes, not often enough. She was asked what she watched it for. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, the same reason you watch anything you can't explain, to see if it changes, to see if there's something you missed, to check, I suppose, to check that it's still the same, that the thing in the footage is still the same thing and not getting. She stopped. She was asked to finish the sentence. She said she didn't want to. The thing in the footage has not changed. The footage is 8 years old and the thing in it is exactly what it was the night Camille Rousseau's camera caught it. Crouched, still, patient, ancient, with its 4 jointed fingers and its unmoving eyes. Watching. March 14 th, 2008. University of Connecticut Psychiatric SERVICES Intake Report. Patient, female, age 31. No prior psychiatric history. Occupation, Marine Archivist, Connecticut State Archives. Presenting complaint. Patient reports persistent visual phenomenon occurring in bedroom 11 nights consecutive. Creature at the foot of the bed. Patient reports inability to sleep. Patient reports perceptual changes including seeing outlines of things in rooms when I know they're empty. Patient scores 22/27 on PHQ-9 severe depression range. Patient denies suicidal ideation. Diagnosis, major depressive episode with psychotic features. Prescribed. Follow-up April 3, 2008. Patient reports phenomenon has ceased. Patient appears functional. File closed. Witness Cassandra Webb, Marine Archivist, Connecticut State Archives, 2008. I found Warren Hoole's file 6 months after he disappeared. It was in the research archive pending final documentation. Standard process, missing persons attached to active research contracts stay in a review queue. I opened it to close it out. I read it because reading the file was my job. And I read the journal, the full journal, the parts that were in the official record and the parts that weren't. And I thought about the captain, about what he'd been living with alone on that boat for 11 days. And that night I went home and I went to bed, and I know how this sounds, it was there. At the foot of the bed, just like he described, I thought, this is what he saw, I'm seeing what he saw. And then I thought something worse. I thought, did reading the file do this? Did reading about it let it in? Narrator RETURNS, Cassandra Webb left Connecticut State Archives in 2009. She now works in a hospital administrative role in Burlington, Vermont. Day shift only. She has not read a case file involving missing persons since 2008. She sleeps with the lights on. November 2003 through November 2023. Timeline card. 20 years of documented encounters following the first use of the name Rake in the online post of November 2003. Allen's archive counts 73. The true number accounting for unreported cases, cases dismissed as psychological, cases that never reached any collector is, by Allen's own statistical projection, orders of magnitude larger. The file that should not exist but does. A memorandum circulated within FEMA in 2016, obtained through a FOIA request by an independent researcher, referencing anomalous behavioral clusters in post-disaster populations, including consistent reports of a white, non-human presence in sleeping quarters. The memo recommends standard crisis counseling protocol. The memo was authored by someone whose name is redacted. The department it originated from is listed as Integrated Risk Assessment. That department does not appear in FEMA's publicly listed organizational structure. Other cases, other dates, other names. September 4th, 2011. Osaka, Japan, Kenji Yamamoto, 44, systems engineer, filed a report with local police after 6 nights of a pale figure crouching at the foot of the bed. Report dismissed. Yamamoto contacted an online Rake research community on September 12th, stopped posting on September 19th. His family reported him missing on September 27th. He was found 4 days later in a hotel 40 kilometers from his home, alive. He did not explain how he got there. He has given no interviews. February 19th, 2015. Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia fishing community. 3 separate households reported the same phenomenon within a 5-day window. No connection between households beyond geographic proximity. All 3 reports described a white crouching figure. All 3 household heads refused follow-up interviews. The community's parish priest confirmed without specifics that he had provided counsel to several families. He declined to elaborate. August 7th, 2018. Nairobi, Kenya, Dr. Amara Osai, clinical psychologist, submitted a case study to an East African psychiatric journal describing a patient who presented with fixed ideation regarding a watching entity, described in terms that match Western creepypasta iconography, despite the patient having no documented exposure to English-language internet forums. The case study was peer-reviewed. It was published. 6 months later, a correction note appeared, signed by Dr. Osai, stating that the cultural specificity of the patient's description is better accounted for by pre-existing East African folkloric tradition than by Western digital influence. She listed 3 oral tradition sources. All 3 contain descriptions consistent with the Rake in every material detail. January 3 RD, 2022. Rural Idaho, a family of 4 contacted local law enforcement regarding a figure seen by all 4 family members on 3 consecutive nights. Police found no evidence of trespassing. Family relocated within the week. Their former property is currently on the market. It has not sold. The listing has been active for 26 months. October 31 SD, 2023. Portland, Oregon, Melissa Varga, who you met earlier in this account, the occupational therapist. The woman who sat on a cabin porch in her pajamas in 38-degree weather and told a rental manager what she'd seen in the dark. Melissa Varga posted to a private online forum at 3:24 a.m. Pacific time. The post said, "It's back, same room, different house. I moved twice." The date closest to today. The pattern does not stop. The final known survivor account. The last person who saw it and came back with something that functions as language. His name is not available for publication by his request. He is 58 years old. He is a retired clinical psychologist from the University of Edinburgh who spent 11 years studying sleep disorders and who encountered the rake, he believes, as a consequence of his research, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the gradual accumulation of patient testimony that he had been, for 11 years, absorbing without adequate distance. He saw it on 17 consecutive nights in the winter of 2016. He did not seek psychiatric treatment. He is a psychologist. He knew the diagnostic frameworks. He knew what they would conclude. He chose to sit with the experience and record it instead. His recordings exist. 93 minutes of audio, recorded night by night, in a voice that begins professionally and ends somewhere else entirely. Alan has heard all 93 minutes, so has this researcher. The recordings are not transcribed here. What can be captured in text is a condensed version of what the retired psychologist said in the final recorded session on night 17 at 4:48 a.m., speaking in the low, careful voice of a man who has been awake for the better part of 3 weeks. Witness Dr. Redacted, retired clinical psychologist, University of Edinburgh, 2016. I want to go on record, even if this record is only for myself, even if I'm the only one who ever hears it, about what I've observed over the last 17 nights. I have been a professional observer for 30 years. I know how to separate what I see from what I interpret about what I see. What I see, a figure. Consistent in every physical detail across 17 consecutive appearances. What I observe about what I see. It does not want anything from me. I have spent 17 nights waiting for the nature of the transaction to reveal itself, and I have concluded, and I say this as someone whose entire career has been built on the premise that behavior is motivated, that there is no transaction. There is only the watching, and I find that more frightening than any transaction would have been. Because a transaction can be concluded, the watching doesn't conclude. Narrator RETURNS, his last recorded words on the subject. I'm going to try to sleep now. I don't think it matters. I think it will be there either way. He left Edinburgh in the spring of 2017. He has not returned to academic work. His colleagues describe him as well, functional, changed in some way they cannot specify. He sleeps, his sister reports, with the television on. The sound, she thinks, makes the room feel less quiet. She has not asked him to explain what he means by quiet. Current status, what exists now. The rake remains undocumented by any official scientific or governmental body. The FEMA memorandum from 2016 is the closest thing to official acknowledgement. It uses clinical language designed to dissolve the specificity of what it is describing. It was filed in a category. It is, technically, accessible. It has been accessed 3 times since its FOIA release, per the request tracking records. Once by the independent researcher who filed the original FOIA, once by James Allen, and once by an unknown requester whose identifying information reads Federal Research Office, DEPT, of Integrated Risk Assessment. The Department of Integrated Risk Assessment does not publicly exist. Dr. Simon Aldrich, former Defense Intelligence Analyst, 2021. In my experience, when a department doesn't show up on the org chart, there are 2 explanations. The first is that it's a clerical error. The second is that it's functioning exactly as intended. He was asked which explanation he favored in this case. He said, "Neither one makes me feel better." What files remain sealed? the complete photographic documentation from the 2003 Amaranthan investigation, the full Allen archive, which Allen has physically secured at 11 undisclosed locations, the Rousseau footage of which only 3 copies are confirmed to exist, all in private hands, the recordings of the Edinburgh psychologist, which he has not permitted to be duplicated, the FEMA memorandums attachments, which were redacted in the FOIA release, the document that should not exist but does, a handwritten note found in the eastern cell of the monastery in rural Poland that Brother Alexander occupied in 1647. The note was found during a 2003 renovation of the cell's floor, sealed in a wax-coated leather tube beneath the original flagstones. The monastery dated it to the 17th century by the paper composition and ink chemistry. The note contains 12 words. In the original Polish it reads, "Nie odchadzi, tylko czeka, zos bilo tude, zos bedzi." Translation: it does not leave, it only waits. It has always been here, it always will be. Brother Alexander sealed this message under the floor. For someone to find. Melissa Varga's apartment in Portland, Oregon is on the 3rd floor. She keeps the lights on all night, every night, which her neighbor has mentioned twice. She bought new blinds, blackout blinds, the kind that seal against the frame, because she found herself, on the 9th night back in the city, watching the bottom of the window in the dark. She is fine. She says this when asked. She means it. She goes to work. She does good work. She calls her sister on Sundays. She takes the stairs instead of the elevator now, which she attributes to general wellness. She doesn't mention that the elevator requires standing in a small enclosed space with her back to the door. She doesn't read before bed anymore. She falls asleep with the television on, volume low, something light. She wakes sometimes at 3 a.m. She does not check the foot of the bed. She knows it is fine. She knows the room is empty. She lies very still. Her cat, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed for 3 years, has started sleeping on the windowsill. She has not mentioned this to anyone. It is probably nothing. It is probably nothing. The windowsill faces east. It does not end. This is the final and most essential fact, the one that the arc of this account has been building toward across every testimony and every document, and every careful, inadequate attempt to put language around something for which language was never designed. The rake does not end because it exists on a timescale for which ending is not a relevant category. Warren Hoole's boat is still in a marina in Rhode Island, under new ownership. And somewhere in the cold Atlantic water off Watch Hill, the anchor chain still holds against the current. The monastery's eastern cell in rural Poland is a storage room now, the floor repaired, the flagstones smooth. Margaret Holt's semi-detached farmhouse in Yorkshire has been renovated 3 times and currently lists on a rental website with high ratings. Melissa Varga's cat sits on the eastern windowsill. And in the dark of every room, in the specific 3 a.m. quiet that the human nervous system was designed to process as safe and empty and unoccupied, something that was old before the Lascaux caves were painted, and will be old when the last human eye closes forever, something that has never needed to want anything, that simply is, has always been, will always be, crouches at the foot of the bed. In your room, in every room, always. Not because it followed you here, not because you earned this attention, because the watching is what it does, and you are what is watched, and the arrangement was in place long before your particular consciousness arrived to perceive it. The horror is not that it found you. The horror is that you were never not found. And so I return, as I must, as this account demanded from its first word, to the interior, to the space behind the eyes that have been the subject of so many pages and so much inadequate language, to the mind that has spent however many months assembling this account, learning this history, sitting in the dark at 4 a.m. and understanding what the dark contains. I know now what Brother Alexander knew in 1647, what Hoole knew in the last entry of his journal, What the Edinburgh psychologist recorded in his quiet, careful, utterly altered voice at 4:48 in the morning of his 17th night. I know that the watching does not require my awareness to continue. I know that every night of my life before this research, every night before I woke up, it was there. And every night I spent lying still in the specific paralysis of the scene, it was there. And every night I have spent since, with the lights on and the television muttering and the cat, God help me, moved to the windowsill, it is there. I know this the way I know my own heartbeat. Constant, below the threshold of usual attention, real in a way that only stops being comfortable when you begin to attend to it. I am writing this at 3 a.m. The room is lit. The room is empty. I have checked. I have confirmed. I am not going to turn off the light. I am going to finish this sentence, and I am going to close the document, and I am going to lie in the lit room in the specific stillness of a person who knows what the dark contains and has decided, tonight, to be lit. It will not help. I know this. The light, the television, the sealed blinds, the cat on the windowsill, these are the rituals of people who have understood something and are not sure what else to do with the understanding. The rake is not deterred by lamplight. The rake is not deterred by anything. The rake does not need to be deterred. Deterrence requires motivation, and the rake does not want. It simply is. It has always been. The oldest thing about you is not your name, not your memory, not the language in which you think. It is the shape your sleeping body makes in the dark, watched since before the first word was spoken, familiar to something that has no word for familiar, patient in the way that stones are patient, in the way that the dark before the first fire was patient, waiting for nothing, needing nothing, present in the only way that has ever truly mattered, completely, eternally at the foot of the bed.